My name is Ava and I'm 34 years old. I've always been the type of person who goes above and beyond for family, especially when it came to pleasing my mother-in-law, Margaret. As a professional event planner, I put my heart into creating perfect moments for others. Yet I spent years trying to win over a woman who seemed determined to keep me on the outside. When I discovered I was excluded from an important family gathering, something inside me snapped. That's when I made the decision to cancel the elaborate birthday party I'd been planning for months. If you've ever dealt with difficult in-laws, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button and subscribe to see how my story unfolds. I met James when I was 27 years old. I had just started my own event planning business after working for a larger company for several years. It was actually through planning a corporate event for his law firm that our paths crossed. He was handsome, intelligent, and had this warm smile that made me feel instantly comfortable. We hit it off immediately, and within 6 months, we were seriously dating. My business was small but growing steadily. I specialized in creating personalized events that truly captured the essence of what my clients wanted to celebrate. I prided myself on attention to detail and making everyone feel included and special. Little did I know how these skills would be tested in my personal life. When James first mentioned meeting his mother, I was nervous, but excited. Meeting the parents is always a big step, and I wanted to make a good impression. Margaret lived in a beautiful suburban home about 30 minutes outside the city. When we arrived, she greeted James with a warm hug that lasted just a little too long and then turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So this is the event planner," she said, emphasizing my profession in a way that made it sound less than impressive. "James has told me so much about you." That first dinner seemed to go well on the surface. Margaret had prepared all of James's favorite childhood dishes and spent most of the evening telling stories about him growing up. She was clearly proud of her son, and I found her stories endearing, even if I noticed I was rarely included in the conversation. Whenever I tried to join in or share something about myself, Margaret would nod politely before steering the conversation back to another tale about James. "You know, James's ex-girlfriend Ashley was such a wonderful cook," Margaret mentioned casually over dessert. Her family had been friends with ours for generations. Such a shame things didn't work out. I caught the slight frown on James's face, but he quickly masked it and changed the subject. Later, when I asked about Ashley, he brushed it off. "They dated through college, but they wanted different things. Mum just had a hard time letting go of the idea of us together. Don't worry about it." But these comments continued. Every time we visited, Margaret found ways to bring up Ashley or make subtle criticisms about me. "Oh, your business sounds nice, dear. A real career would offer more stability, of course, but it's good you have something to keep you busy. That dress is an interesting choice. A bit casual for a family dinner, but I suppose it's the style these days. Your parents are from where again? I'm not familiar with that area." Each comment was delivered with a smile, making it difficult to address without seeming oversensitive. James never seemed to notice these subtle digs, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge them. I tried to brush them off, telling myself she was just protective of her son and needed time to warm up to me. When James proposed after a year of dating, I was ecstatic. We wanted a relatively small wedding, something intimate and meaningful. But as soon as we announced our engagement, Margaret inserted herself into every aspect of the planning. Despite being a professional event planner, my opinions were consistently overlooked. Margaret had ideas about everything from the venue to the flowers to the guest list. She insisted we invite distant family members and her bridge club friends, people I had never met, and James barely knew. When I suggested a beautiful outdoor garden for the ceremony, Margaret pushed for her church, despite neither James nor I being particularly religious. "But we've always had family weddings at St. Mary's," she insisted. "What would people think if we broke tradition?" James, not wanting to disappoint his mother, often sided with her to keep the peace. "It's just one day, Ava. If it makes Mum happy, what's the harm?" But it wasn't just one day. It was our day. A day I had spent my career helping other couples make perfect, now being taken over by someone else's vision. The final straw came during our cake tasting. I had found a wonderful local baker, known for unique flavors and artistic designs. Margaret came along uninvited and spent the entire session criticizing each sample. "Too sweet. Too modern. No one will eat that." When the baker asked what we had in mind for the design, Margaret pulled out a magazine clipping of a traditional ornate cake before I could speak. "This is what a proper wedding cake looks like," she said firmly. Later that night, I broke down in tears, feeling like I was losing control of not just my wedding, but my relationship too. James held me and promised to talk to his mother, but his conversation with her resulted only in her tearfully claiming that she was just trying to help, and that I clearly didn't want her involved at all. To keep the peace, I compromised on many things, but insisted on choosing my own dress without Margaret's input. Even this small boundary was tested when she showed up unannounced to my final fitting with my mother and best friend, claiming she just happened to be shopping nearby. The wedding day itself should have been a dream come true, but Margaret found ways to make her presence known. She arrived at the bridal suite multiple times with urgent questions that interrupted our preparations. And then when I walked down the aisle, I saw her sitting in the front row wearing a cream-coloured dress that from a distance could easily be mistaken for white. During the reception, Margaret gave an unscheduled speech about losing her little boy and how she hoped I would take good care of him just like she had. She ended by saying she was welcoming me to the family, but something in her tone suggested I would always be an outsider. Despite these tensions, I truly believed things would improve with time. I loved James deeply, and I wanted to have a good relationship with his mother. I told myself that once the stress of the wedding was over, once she saw how happy I made her son Margaret, would accept me as part of the family. I couldn't have been more wrong. After our honeymoon, James and I bought a house about 20 minutes from Margaret's place. Close enough for regular visits, but with enough distance to have our own space. James thought this was the perfect compromise, but in retrospect, it was the beginning of years of boundary issues. Margaret established a tradition of Sunday dinners at her house almost immediately. Each week, we would drive over and spend several hours in her company. If we ever tried to skip a week for other plans, she would make comments about how family should come first, or ask if we were having problems that kept us away. During these dinners, Margaret continued her pattern of subtle criticism. If I brought a dish to contribute, she would take a small bite and say something like, "It's interesting, different from how we usually make it, but James seems to like it." If I didn't bring anything, she would remark on how she always made sure to contribute when visiting someone's home. Family conversations often revolved around people I didn't know or events that happened before I entered the picture. They would laugh about inside jokes, and when I asked for context, Margaret would sigh and say, "It's just one of those things you had to be there for," effectively shutting down my attempt to join in. Despite this treatment, I continued to make efforts to build a relationship with her. For her 60th birthday, I planned a surprise party that brought together friends and family from across the country. I spent weeks coordinating with her friends, finding the perfect venue, and creating a beautiful photo slideshow of her life. When the day came, she seemed genuinely surprised and touched, hugging everyone enthusiastically, everyone except me. She thanked her friends for such a wonderful surprise, without acknowledging my role in organising it. The following year, I suggested a family vacation to the beach house, where James had spent summers as a child. I researched activities that Margaret would enjoy, found old family recipes to cook during our stay, and even arranged for some of her friends to drive down for a day to visit. Throughout the trip, Margaret reminisced about previous family vacations, making comparisons that always seemed to highlight how things were better before. I created personalised photo albums as gifts, spent hours helping her reorganise her basement when she mentioned wanting to do so, and regularly called to check in on her during the week. These gestures were rarely acknowledged and never reciprocated. When I would express frustration to James about his mother's behaviour, he would typically respond with, "That's just how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it." "You're reading too much into things. She was probably just having a bad day." "You're too sensitive. You need to let these things roll off your back." His dismissal of my feelings only added to my growing resentment and self-doubt. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining the subtle ways she excluded me? Sometimes I would lie awake at night, replaying interactions, wondering if I was the problem. The dynamic shifted even further when I became pregnant with our daughter Lily. What should have been a joyous time for us as a couple became another opportunity for Margaret to assert herself. She insisted on coming to doctor's appointments, offering outdated advice that contradicted my obstetrician's recommendations, and frequently made comments about how she had done things the right way when raising James. "I never ate that when I was pregnant," she would say when seeing my lunch. "No wonder you're having so much heartburn." When we announced we were decorating the nursery with a woodland theme, Margaret showed up the next day with bags full of pink princess decorations, because all little girls want to be princesses. When I gently explained we were sticking with our original plan, She left the bags anyway, saying we would come to our senses eventually. After Lily was born, Margaret's behaviour intensified. She would show up unannounced, claiming she was just in the neighbourhood and thought she would help out. This help usually involved rearranging things in my kitchen, doing laundry differently than I preferred, or making comments about the cleanliness of our home during a time when I was adjusting to life with a newborn. She began referring to herself as Mummy Margaret to Lily, which made my skin crawl. When I asked her to use grandma instead, she laughed it off as me being territorial. As Lily grew, Margaret would undermine my parenting decisions in subtle ways. If I said no dessert until after dinner, Margaret would slip Lily a cookie when she thought I wasn't looking. If I mentioned we were limiting screen time, Margaret would turn on cartoons as soon as we arrived at her house. She would tell Lily endless stories about when Daddy was little, but never included any stories about me or acknowledged my side of the family. It was as if she was creating a narrative for my daughter where I was somehow less significant. James continued to avoid conflict, making excuses for his mother's behaviour and suggesting I was overreacting. The tension began to affect our marriage, leading to arguments that always ended with me feeling invalidated and James feeling defensive. I tried to set boundaries in small ways. I started declining some Sunday dinners, citing work commitments. I would leave the room when Margaret made undermining comments about my parenting. I stopped putting so much effort into pleasing her. But without James's support, these boundaries were easily trampled. The constant struggle began to take a toll on my mental health. I found myself becoming anxious before family gatherings, questioning my worth as a wife and mother, and resenting both Margaret and sometimes even James for putting me in this position. I started seeing a therapist who helped me recognize the unhealthy dynamic, but couldn't solve the fundamental issue. I was married to someone who couldn't or wouldn't stand up to his mother. For 7 years, I tried everything I could think of to be accepted by Margaret. I extended olive branch after olive branch, only to have them snapped in half and handed back to me. But even after all that time, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. It was a random Tuesday evening in July when my world tilted on its axis. Lily was in bed and I was scrolling through social media while James watched TV in the living room. A notification popped up that my sister-in-law, James's younger sister Natalie, had posted new photos. Natalie and I got along well, so I clicked on the album titled Family Reunion Weekend. The first photo showed a large group of people gathered around a picnic table. I recognized James's aunts, uncles and cousins, some of whom I hadn't seen since our wedding. Margaret sat in the center, beaming with James beside her and Lily on his lap. I stared at the image confused. We didn't have any family reunion planned that I knew of. I swiped to the next photo. James and his cousins playing volleyball. Another showed Lily feeding ducks with Margaret. Photo after photo documented what appeared to be a full day of family activities, a day I knew nothing about. My hands shook as I continued scrolling. There were over 50 photos and I wasn't in a single one, because I hadn't been there, because no one had told me it was happening. I walked into the living room, phone in hand, and stood in front of the television. James looked up, annoyed at first, then concerned when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. I turned my phone to show him the photos. "When was this?" His face fell, and I knew immediately that this wasn't a misunderstanding. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "It was last Saturday," he said quietly, "when you were working on the Taylor wedding." "Last Saturday," I repeated. "The day you said you and Lily were going to the Children's Museum and then to your mum's for dinner." James shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't think it was a big deal. You were busy with work, and Mum had organised this get-together with family who were in town." "A get-together, James. This is clearly a family reunion. Your entire extended family was there, and no one thought to invite me." "It was just family," he mumbled. His words hit me like a physical blow. Just family. After 7 years of marriage, after giving birth to our daughter, I was still not considered family in his eyes. "I am your family," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm your wife, Lily's mother. How could you not include me in this?" James ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. "Mum organised it. She said you would be too busy with work and we shouldn't bother you with it. And you agreed with that. You didn't think to say, hey, maybe my wife should know about a family reunion. You didn't think to stand up for me." His silence was answer enough. "Who drove Lily there? Who made sure she had sunscreen on? Who watched her around the water?" My mind was racing through all the parenting decisions that had been made without my input or knowledge. Mum helped with Lily. She was fine, Ava. Nothing happened. That's not the point. I was shouting now, tears streaming down my face. The point is, you lied to me. You excluded me from a family event. You let your mother pretend I don't exist. The argument escalated quickly. James accused me of overreacting, of always making everything about me, of not appreciating how difficult it was for him to be caught between his mother and me. I pointed out years of disrespect that he had ignored or excused, culminating in this blatant exclusion. "I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of one afternoon," he said dismissively. "It's not one afternoon. It's 7 years of being treated like an outsider. 7 years of you choosing your mother over me. 7 years of trying to be part of a family that clearly doesn't want me." James slept on the couch that night, and the next and the next. We moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when necessary, and usually about Lily. I went through the motions of daily life, working, caring for our daughter, maintaining our home, while feeling completely hollow inside. During this time, I confided in my best friend Taylor, who had witnessed the Margaret situation from the beginning. "I always thought James would eventually see what was happening and stand up for you," she said during one of our coffee meetups. "But this crossed a line. He lied to you, Ava. He actively participated in excluding you." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I love him, but I can't keep living like this. I feel like I'm going crazy, like maybe I'm overreacting to everything just like he says." "You're not," Taylor said firmly. "What they did was wrong and you have every right to be hurt. The question is, what happens now?" After 5 days of tension, James finally approached me with what I suppose he considered an apology. "I'm sorry you got upset about the reunion, but," he said, "I should have told you about it. I just didn't want to deal with the drama between you and Mom." It wasn't a real apology. He was sorry I was upset, not sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for the inconvenience of my feelings, not for the betrayal I had experienced. And still, he placed the blame on drama between his mother and me as if I were equally responsible for the situation. But I was too emotionally exhausted to point this out. I nodded and said we would need to talk more about it later when I had processed everything. James seemed relieved to consider the matter closed, but for me, something fundamental had shifted. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I realized with perfect clarity that something needed to change. I couldn't continue putting my heart and soul into a relationship where my feelings were dismissed, my boundaries trampled, and my very existence in the family seemed optional. I had spent years trying to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, bending over backward to accommodate Margaret and support James, often at the expense of my own well-being. It was time to stand up for myself, and I knew exactly where I would start. Margaret's 65th birthday was approaching, and in a cruel twist of irony, James had asked me 2 months earlier to plan an elaborate celebration. Despite my strained relationship with his mother, I had agreed to do it for him and had already invested countless hours in the planning. I had secured the ballroom at the Grand Hotel downtown, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. The deposit alone had been substantial, but James insisted his mother deserved the best for this milestone birthday. I had coordinated with a top-tier caterer, designing a menu that featured all of Margaret's favourite foods, from the appetizers to the custom birthday cake, that had required multiple tasting sessions to perfect. One of my most significant contributions was a custom photo montage I had created collecting pictures from throughout Margaret's life. I had reached out to her friends and family, digitized old photographs, and worked with a professional editor to set it all to music. It was the kind of personal touch I prided myself on in my professional work. I had also spent weeks coordinating with family members who would be flying in from across the country. I arranged hotel blocks, transportation from the airport, and a detailed itinerary for the weekend's activities. Margaret's sister from Florida, her brother from Chicago, and numerous cousins and friends had all confirmed their attendance. Despite all this work, the planning process had been grueling, mainly due to Margaret herself. She insisted on weekly planning meetings where she would review every detail of my work, often making last-minute changes that required me to renegotiate with vendors or completely redo aspects of the event. The flowers should be lilies, not roses, she would decide after I had already finalized the floral arrangements. And I never said I wanted that shade of blue for the table linens. It should be more of a royal blue. When I showed her the preliminary design for the invitations, which I had spent hours creating to reflect her elegant taste, she frowned and said, "These aren't at all what I envisioned." Ashley's mother had the most beautiful invitations for her 60th. Perhaps we could ask her for the contact information for her designer. Every decision was met with criticism, every suggestion countered with a reference to how someone else had done it better, and yet despite my professional experience in event planning, Margaret would often take my ideas and present them to others as her own. I thought it would be lovely to have a string quartet during cocktail hour, she told her friend on the phone, an idea I had suggested the week before, and she had initially dismissed. I was essentially providing thousands of dollars worth of professional services for free, on top of the actual expenses of the party that James and I were largely covering. Yet Margaret treated me more like an incompetent assistant than a daughter-in-law trying to do something special for her. As the event drew closer, Margaret began making comments about how her real friends would be there, implying that my presence was merely functional rather than desired. She would discuss seating arrangements, ensuring that her closest friends were at her table, while vaguely suggesting I would be seated somewhere in the back to manage the event logistics. One afternoon, I stopped by Margaret's house to drop off some sample centerpieces for her approval. She wasn't expecting me, and as I approached the front door, I could hear her on the phone through the open window. "Susan, you won't believe what she's done now," Margaret was saying, her voice carrying clearly. "The menu is all wrong. I don't know why James couldn't have married someone from our kind of background. Someone who understands our family traditions." I froze on the doorstep, the box of centerpieces heavy in my arms. Our kind of background. The words echoed in my head, confirming what I had suspected all along. It wasn't just that I wasn't good enough for James in her eyes. It was that I would never be good enough because of where I came from, who I was at my core. I set the box down silently and walked back to my car. Margaret never knew I had been there. Never knew I had heard her true feelings spoken so plainly when she thought no one was listening. I drove home in a daze, her words playing on repeat in my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to James, who had moved back to our bedroom, though things were still tense between us, and thought about everything I had endured. The constant criticism, the exclusion, the way James had repeatedly failed to stand up for me. And now the family reunion I hadn't been invited to, and the birthday party I was killing myself to perfect. For a woman who talked about me with such disdain behind my back. In that sleepless night, something shifted within me. A clarity emerged from the fog of hurt and confusion. I had been trying for years to earn a place in this family, to prove my worth to a woman who had decided long ago that I would never be worthy. I had been silencing my own needs and feelings to keep the peace, all while being treated as an outsider. No more. Morning came, and with it a newfound determination. I made coffee and waited for James to wake up. When he shuffled into the kitchen, I took a deep breath and began. "We need to talk about your mother," I said calmly. James sighed heavily, clearly tired of this topic. "Ava, can we not do this right now? I have an early meeting." "This can't wait. I overheard your mother yesterday talking to Susan about me. She said she wishes you had married someone from your kind of background." James had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his response was predictable. "She probably didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how she can be when she's frustrated." "That's exactly the problem, James. I do know how she can be, but you always make excuses for her. You never hold her accountable for the way she treats me." "What do you want me to do? She's my mother. And I'm your wife, your partner, the mother of your child. Don't I deserve some loyalty too?" James checked his watch, clearly wanting to end the conversation. "We can talk about this tonight. I really need to get ready for my meeting." As he turned to leave, I felt a familiar resignation wash over me. Nothing would change. James would continue to prioritize his mother's feelings over mine. I would continue to be the outsider expected to smile and plan the perfect birthday party for a woman who didn't even want me in her family. But then I remembered the steel I had found within myself during that sleepless night. I remembered my worth, my dignity, and I made a decision that would change everything. The morning after my confrontation with James, I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and made the first call. "Hello, Grand Hotel. This is Ava Henderson. I'm calling about the ballroom reservation for the Margaret Wilson birthday party on the 16th. My voice was steady, my resolve firm. I need to cancel the reservation. Over the next few hours, I methodically called every vendor involved in the party planning. The caterer, the florist, the rental company for the tables and chairs, the audio-visual team for the photo montage. One by one, I cancelled each arrangement. Some vendors were understanding and agreed to refund most of the deposits since we were still a few weeks out. Others had stricter cancellation policies, but I didn't care about the money at this point. This was about reclaiming my power, my dignity. After the vendors, I began calling family members who were planning to travel for the event. "Hi, Aunt Linda. This is Ava James's wife. I'm calling about Margaret's birthday celebration. I'm afraid it's been cancelled." Most were surprised but understanding when I explained that there had been unforeseen family circumstances. Some even seemed relieved not to make the trip. A few expressed concern, asking if everything was all right with Margaret's health. I assured them she was fine and that it was simply a change of plans. With each call, each cancellation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I had been carrying the burden of trying to please someone who was determined not to be pleased. I had been bending over backward to fit into a family that didn't want me. Now I was standing up straight for the first time in a long time. I knew there would be consequences. I knew Margaret would be furious and James would be caught in the middle. But I also knew I couldn't continue living as I had been dismissed, disrespected, and disregarded. The cancellation process took most of the day. When I made the final call, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to begin. My phone rang around 4 in the afternoon. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided it was better to face this head on. I answered the call. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Margaret's voice was shrill with anger. "The bakery just called me to confirm the cancellation of my birthday cake." "What cancellation?" "I've cancelled the party, Margaret." I said, my voice calm despite my racing heart. "You what? You have no right. This is my birthday, my celebration." Actually, I had every right. My name was on all the contracts as the event planner. And considering I was doing all this work for free, I also had the right to withdraw my professional services. "How dare you?" Margaret was practically screaming now. "After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful, selfish..." I cut her off before she could continue her tirade. "What exactly have you done for me, Margaret?" Criticised me at every turn, excluded me from family events, made it clear I'll never be good enough for your son or your family. "I'm calling James right now. He'll fix this. He'll see what a spiteful, vindictive person you really are." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll be here when he gets home." Margaret hung up and I sat in the sudden silence of my home office. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I had taken control of a situation that had been controlling me for too long. James came home earlier than usual, slamming the front door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. His face was flushed with anger as he stormed into the kitchen where I was calmly preparing dinner. "What the hell? Ava Mom just called me hysterical. Did you really cancel her entire birthday party?" "Yes, I did." "How could you do this to my mother? She's devastated." "Do you have any idea how childish and petty this looks?" I put down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and turned to face him fully. Childish and petty. Was it childish and petty when your mother excluded me from the family reunion? Was it childish and petty when she told Susan she wished you had married someone from your kind of background? That's different, and you know it. This was a major event. People were flying in from out of state. I called everyone. They all understood that plans sometimes change. James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You've gone too far this time, Ava. Way too far." "No, James. For once I'm standing up for myself because you never do. For 7 years I've tried to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law. I've organised family events, remembered birthdays, created special moments. And in return I've been criticised, excluded and treated like an outsider." I could see Demez was about to interrupt to defend his mother as he always did, but I held up my hand to stop him. "The family reunion was the last straw. You lied to me. You took our daughter to a family event and deliberately didn't tell me about it. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? And then when I confronted you, you dismissed my feelings. Again." James's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a defensive stubbornness. "Mum organised it. She said you were busy with work. And you couldn't have said, my wife is part of this family and should be included. You couldn't have stood up for me just once. It's not that simple, Ava. You don't understand the position I'm in." "I understand perfectly. You're in the position of a husband who consistently chooses his mother over his wife, and I'm done competing for a place in your life that should be mine by right." I walked past him to our bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase I had packed earlier that day. James followed me, his expression changing from anger to alarm. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" "I'm staying with Taylor for a few days. I need some space to think about our marriage and what I want going forward." "You're leaving, just like that. What about Lily?" "I've already talked to her. I told her Mommy needs a few days of quiet time to do some work and that I'll call her every night before bed. She'll be fine with you for a few days. It will give you some time to think about what kind of family you want to have, one where your wife is respected and included, or one where your mother calls all the shots." James looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe I was actually standing up to him. "This is extreme, Ava. We can work this out without you leaving." "We've been trying to work it out for 7 years, James. Nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse. I need time away to clear my head and decide what's best for me and for Lily." I zipped up my suitcase and headed for the door. James followed, still protesting, still not quite understanding the gravity of the situation. As I put my suitcase in the car, he stood in the driveway looking lost. "I'll call to check on Lily," I said, "and we can talk in a few days when we've both had time to think." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw James still standing there, watching me leave. For the first time in our relationship, I had chosen myself over keeping the peace. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Over the next few days, my phone exploded with messages and calls. Margaret had apparently gone on a campaign to paint me as unstable and vindictive to anyone who would listen. Various family members reached out, some to express concern, others to admonish me for causing drama. What surprised me were the messages from a few family members who expressed support. James's sister Natalie called to say she had witnessed Margaret's behaviour over the years and understood why I had reached my breaking point. A cousin admitted that Margaret had driven away James's previous girlfriends with similar tactics. It seemed I wasn't the first to experience Margaret's particular brand of exclusion, just the first to marry into the family despite it. As the dust began to settle, I realised that in cancelling Margaret's birthday party, I had done more than just assert a boundary. I had exposed a dynamic that had been poisoning my marriage for years, and now everyone had to decide how to respond to that reality, including James. Taylor's one-bedroom apartment became my sanctuary for 3 days. She gave me the bedroom while she slept on the pull-out couch despite my protests. Each morning she would make coffee and sit with me at her tiny kitchen table, listening as I sorted through years of pent-up feelings about my marriage and my relationship with Margaret. "I keep wondering if I went too far," I admitted on the second morning. "Cancelling the party was drastic. After what they did to you, I think it was overdue," Taylor said firmly. "Sometimes it takes a dramatic gesture to make people realise they can't keep treating you like crap." I just don't know if James will ever really understand. He's been conditioned his whole life to put his mother first. Then maybe this is the wake-up call he needed. I called Lily every night before her bedtime, listening to her chatter about her day and what Daddy had made for dinner. James and I kept our conversations brief and focused on Lily avoiding the larger issues that loomed between us. On my third day at Taylor's, I was surprised by a text from James's sister Natalie, asking if we could meet for coffee. We had always gotten along well, but had never spent time together without James or other family members present. We met at a cafe halfway between Taylor's apartment and Natalie's office. She looked so much like James, the same warm brown eyes and dimple when she smiled, that it made my heart ache a little. "I wanted to check on you," she said, after we had gotten our drinks, "and to tell you that I get it. What you did with the party, I mean." "You do?" I was surprised by her directness. Natalie nodded. "Mum has always been difficult with anyone James cared about. But with you, it's been worse because you actually married him. You became permanent." "I'm not sure how permanent anything is right now," I admitted. "James called me yesterday," Natalie continued. "He was pretty upset trying to understand why you would do this to Mum. I told him he was asking the wrong question. He should be asking why Mum has been treating you like an outsider for 7 years and why he's allowed it." I felt tears welling up at her words, at the simple validation that I wasn't crazy, that what I had experienced was real. "Did he listen?" I asked. "I think so. For the first time, maybe." I reminded him about Kristen and Melissa. "Who are they?" "Girlfriends before you. Serious ones. Both relationships ended largely because of Mum's interference. I told him if he doesn't address this now, he might lose you too. And this time there's Lily to consider." Our conversation continued for over an hour. Natalie shared stories of growing up with Margaret, of the impossible standards and emotional manipulation. As the daughter, she had experienced a different kind of controlling behaviour than James had, but she recognised the patterns. She had worked hard to establish boundaries with her mother, which was why she lived in another state, and limited her visits home. James never had to do that work, she explained. As the son is Mum's favourite, he was rewarded for compliance. It's going to be hard for him to change, but if he values your marriage, he'll try. When I returned to Taylor's apartment that afternoon, I felt lighter somehow. Natalie's support and understanding had given me hope that change was possible, even if it wouldn't be easy. That evening, my phone rang with James's number. I answered expecting another conversation about Lily's schedule or what clothes she needed for school the next day. Instead, his voice was subdued, thoughtful. Can we talk? Really talk, I mean. Not about logistics or Lily's schedule, about us. Okay, I said cautiously. Not on the phone. Could I come to Taylor's, or we could meet somewhere neutral? We agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant near Taylor's apartment. When I arrived, James was already there, sitting at a corner table away from other diners. He stood when he saw me, and I was struck by how tired he looked with dark circles under his eyes, and his usually neat hair uncombed. After we ordered drinks, an awkward silence fell between us. James was the first to break it. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days, he began. And talking to Natalie, she helped me see some things more clearly. I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever realization he had come to. I've been unfair to you, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. For years, really. I've been caught between you and Mom, and instead of supporting you as my wife, I've been trying to keep the peace by letting her behaviour slide. Yes, you have, I agreed quietly. The family reunion, that was wrong. I should never have lied to you about it. I should never have gone without you. Kassash. He reached across to the table, tentatively placing his hand near mine without quite touching. I'm sorry, Ava. Truly sorry. It was the first genuine apology he had ever offered about his mother, and I felt a crack in the protective wall I had built around my heart. It's not just the reunion, James. It's 7 years of your mother treating me like I don't belong, and you acting like I'm imagining it or overreacting. I know, Natalie helped me see that. She reminded me of how Mom behaved with my ex-girlfriends, how she's always tried to control my relationships. I guess I was so used to it that I didn't see how wrong it was. We talked for hours, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. James admitted that he had always taken the path of least resistance with his mother, finding it easier to pacify her than to confront her. He acknowledged that this had come at my expense, and that he had failed to be the partner I deserved. I want to do better, he said earnestly. I want to set things right. I love you, Ava. I don't want to lose you over this. What about your mother? I asked. Because nothing will change if you don't set firm boundaries with her. I know. I'm going to talk to her tomorrow. Really talk to her, not just smooth things over. And I was thinking, maybe we should try couples therapy to help us communicate better and rebuild what's been damaged. I felt a cautious hope rising within me. This was the James I had fallen in love with, thoughtful, caring, willing to grow and change. I had almost forgotten he existed beneath the conflict-avoidant man who had emerged in our marriage. I'd like that, I said. But I need you to understand something, James. I'm not going back to how things were. I can't keep trying to earn a place in your family that I should have had from the beginning. If we're going to move forward, things have to change fundamentally. They will, he promised. Starting with me. I returned home the next day, not certain that all our problems were solved, but willing to try a new approach with James as my true partner rather than caught in the middle. True to his word, James went to see his mother alone. I later learned that it was a difficult conversation with Margaret, alternating between playing the victim, expressing outrage at my vindictive behaviour, and trying to guilt James into taking her side. But for the first time, James held firm. He told her plainly that her treatment of me over the years had been disrespectful and hurtful. He made it clear that while he loved her as his mother, I was his wife and partner, and he would no longer tolerate any disrespect toward me or our marriage. Most significantly, he set a consequence. If she couldn't respect these boundaries, she would see less of him, and by extension, less of Lily. Margaret initially reacted with denial and anger, insisting that she had always been welcoming to me, and that I was the one creating problems. When James pointed out specific instances of exclusion and criticism, she dismissed them as misunderstandings or claimed I was too sensitive. But when James stood firm, making it clear that this wasn't negotiable, Margaret's tone began to change. The prospect of limited access to her son and granddaughter was a powerful motivator. A week later, we arranged a family meeting at our house. Margaret arrived looking subdued, a stark contrast to her usual commanding presence. James facilitated the conversation, something he had never done before. Mom Ava is my wife and Lily's mother. She is an essential part of this family, not an optional addition. From now on, any family event includes her, or it's not a family event. Margaret nodded stiffly but didn't speak. And the criticism, the comparisons, the subtle put-downs, those stop now. If Ava feels disrespected in any way, we will leave or end the conversation immediately. I watched Margaret's face as James laid out these boundaries. I could see the struggle within her, the resistance to this new dynamic warring with her desire to maintain her relationship with her son. Finally, James turned to me. Ava, is there anything you want to add? I had thought carefully about what I wanted to say in this moment. I didn't want to pile on or make Margaret feel attacked, but I did need to express my perspective. Margaret, I have always wanted a good relationship with you. I've tried for years to be the daughter-in-law you wanted, but it seemed like nothing was ever good enough. I'm not perfect, and I'm sure I've made mistakes along the way, but I deserve to be treated with respect as James's wife and as a person. Margaret looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. I never meant to make you feel unwelcome, she said, though her tone suggested she was saying what she thought she should rather than what she truly believed. Intentions aside, that was the effect, I replied calmly. Going forward, I hope we can build a more positive relationship based on mutual respect. The conversation wasn't magical. Margaret didn't suddenly transform into a warm, accepting mother-in-law, but it was a start, a clear marking of a line that hadn't existed before. As she was leaving, Margaret paused at the door and turned to me. I am sorry about your party, she said stiffly. You had put a lot of work into it. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of everything that had led to that point, but it was something. A small crack in the wall of hostility that had stood between us for so long. Thank you, I said simply. In the weeks that followed, we began to establish a new normal. James and I started seeing a couples therapist who helped us communicate more effectively and process the damage that had been done to our relationship. I began to see how James's upbringing had shaped his conflict avoidance, and he began to understand the depth of hurt I had experienced. Margaret tested the boundaries a few times, as we expected she would. She made a critical comment about my parenting during a Sunday visit, and James immediately stood up and said, Mom, that's exactly the kind of comment we talked about. We're going to leave now and we can try again next weekend. She was shocked the first time, calling after us as we gathered Lily's things and headed for the door. But by the third time, James enforced a boundary. She began to adapt. The criticisms became less frequent, the attempts to exclude me more subtle, and eventually less common. 2 months after the cancelled party, I decided to reach out in my own way. I invited Margaret to our home for a simple dinner, just the four of us. No elaborate planning, no attempt to impress, just a straightforward family meal. To my surprise, she brought a small hostess gift, a potted plant with a card that read simply, "Thank you for the invitation." During dinner, she made a visible effort to include me in the conversation, asking about my work and actually listening to the answer. When she was leaving, she turned to me and said, "This was nice, Ava. Perhaps we could do it again sometime." It wasn't effusive, it wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was a step. A small one, but in the right direction. By the time the holidays came around, we had established a new family dynamic. Margaret was more respectful, James was more supportive, and I was more confident in my place in the family. It wasn't perfect, but it was vastly improved from where we had been. During Christmas dinner at Margaret's house, I noticed something significant. When she told a story about James as a child, she turned to me and added context I wouldn't have known. It was a small gesture of inclusion, but it meant more to me than any elaborate gift could have. The cancelled birthday party had been a catalyst for change, forcing issues into the open that had festered beneath the surface for too long. In taking that drastic step, I had found my voice and reclaimed my dignity. And in doing so, I had given our family a chance at a healthier, more respectful future. It's been just over a year since I cancelled Margaret's birthday party, and the changes in our family dynamic have been profound. While our relationship isn't what you'd call warm and fuzzy, Margaret and I have reached a place of mutual respect that once seemed impossible. The boundaries James established have largely held firm. There have been occasional slips, old habits die hard, but the difference is in how they're addressed. Instead of being ignored or excused, Margaret's occasional attempts to criticise or exclude are met with immediate, consistent consequences from James. And more importantly, they've become increasingly rare. Last month, Margaret invited us for Sunday dinner and specifically asked me what I'd like her to prepare. It was such a simple gesture, but one that would have been unthinkable a year ago. When I suggested a dish my mother used to make, Margaret actually asked for the recipe and made a genuine effort to follow it, even if her version wasn't quite the same as Mom's. The transformation in my marriage has been even more significant. James and I continued with couples therapy for 6 months, working through years of accumulated resentment and establishing new patterns of communication. He's become the partner I always knew he could be: supportive, present, and willing to stand up for our family unit. "I didn't realize how much I was asking you to sacrifice," he told me one night as we sat on our back porch after putting Lily to bed. "I was so used to appeasing my mother that I didn't see how it was hurting you. I'm sorry it took something so drastic to wake me up." Our relationship has deepened in ways I hadn't expected. By facing this conflict together, instead of allowing it to drive us apart, we've discovered a new level of intimacy and trust. I no longer feel like I'm competing for my place in James's life. I know where I stand right beside him as his equal partner. My relationship with Lily has flourished without Margaret's constant interference. At 5 years old now, she's a spirited, confident little girl who knows that both her parents are a united front. Margaret has learned to check with us before giving Lily treats or making promises respecting our parenting decisions in a way she never did before. There was one incident a few months ago when Margaret began to slip back into old patterns. She made a comment about how Lily would probably be more athletic if she took after James's side of the family, a subtle dig at my own lack of sporting prowess. Before I could even respond, James calmly said, "Mom, that's not appropriate. We've talked about these kinds of comments." Margaret immediately backtracked, apologising and changing the subject. Later, she even approached me privately to offer a more genuine apology. It wasn't perfect, but it showed how far we had come. My own journey of healing has perhaps been the most profound change of all. For years, I had internalized the message that I wasn't good enough, that I needed to constantly prove my worth to be accepted. I had allowed my self-esteem to be eroded by Margaret's criticism and James's failure to defend me. Through therapy and self-reflection, I've reclaimed my sense of self-worth. I no longer seek Margaret's approval or validation. I approach our relationship from a position of strength rather than insecurity, which has ironically made it easier for us to interact in a more positive way. My business has thrived as I've channeled more energy into my work and less into trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. I've taken on larger events and expanded my client base, finding fulfillment in my professional success that doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition. Looking back, I realized that cancelling Margaret's birthday party wasn't really about revenge, though the title of this story might suggest otherwise. It was about self-preservation. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that I would no longer accept being treated as less than I deserved. The most valuable lesson I've learned through this journey is that sometimes standing up for yourself means being willing to lose everything. I packed that suitcase and left without knowing if my marriage would survive, but I knew I couldn't continue as things were. It was terrifying, but it was necessary. I've also learned that love shouldn't require sacrificing your dignity. Real love, whether between spouses, parents and children, or in-laws, is built on mutual respect. Without that foundation, no amount of compromise or accommodation can create a healthy relationship. Another lesson that has served me well is that boundaries aren't just rules we set for others. They're expressions of self-respect. By clearly defining what treatment I would and wouldn't accept, I wasn't being selfish or difficult. I was honoring my own worth. Perhaps the most unexpected lesson was discovering that relationships can heal, but only when all parties are willing to acknowledge the problems and commit to change. Margaret didn't transform overnight, and neither did James. It took time, consistency, and sometimes difficult conversations. But the effort has been worth it for the healthier family dynamic we now enjoy. The freedom that came from no longer seeking approval has been life-changing. I no longer exhaust myself trying to win over someone who had decided long ago not to accept me. That energy has been redirected into my marriage, my relationship with Lily, my friendships, and my own personal growth. As I reflect on this journey, I'm reminded of something my grandmother used to say: sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best outcomes. Cancelling that party was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. It went against my nature as a peacekeeper and my professional pride as an event planner. But it led to transformations I couldn't have imagined. So if you're dealing with difficult family dynamics, If you're constantly made to feel like an outsider, remember that you deserve respect. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes what looks like a drastic action in the moment becomes the catalyst for positive change that benefits everyone. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your self-respect? How did you handle challenging family dynamics? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for themselves is not only okay, but sometimes necessary. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that you deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care.